I love Persona as a series. I played all of 4 when I was much younger, and it's a formative piece of media for me, forming a lot of nostalgia and memories that I still hold dear to this day. Persona 3 was fun despite its relative clunkiness, and I've even enjoyed a good chunk of P2, though I've yet to finish. Then there's Persona 5. I've played through it about 3.5 times now between both versions. I love the music, the style, the gameplay, the characters. Persona as a series is dear to me, and I say all of this to preface what I'm about to state, but Persona 5 has a problem. Of course there's the basic stuff that's been hashed to death. The game isn't great about anything to do with queerness. I'm not going to go over that extensively, but if you're interested, there's half a dozen articles out there written, even after the changes that were made in Royal. Then there's the obvious issues with the student-teacher relationships, which I will get to later. But then there's something that I don't see talked about as often, which is complicated. So to get to that, let's first go through each major arc of the game and examine what beliefs are espoused within. I'm going to be as cursory as possible without missing any major details, but I am going to fully spoil the game. So if you haven't played through Persona 5 and it interests you at all, I'd suggest playing through it first. Despite its length, it's definitely worth the time investment. I'll do my best to cover everything related to the video, but as it's a 100+ hour game, I'm absolutely going to miss some things. Please give me grace if I do. With that, let's get right to it. First up, we have the Castle of Lust arc, the introduction to the metaverse, and the Phantom Thieves as a group, starting with Ryuji and Morgana, and then later, on. All individuals who find themselves victimized by the very power structures that are ostensibly put in place to protect them. As an antagonist, we have Kamoshida, a teacher at Joker's school who is a pedophile who is using his position as an ex-Olympian and star gym teacher to sleep with female students, as well as physically abuse male students. He's an all-around very bad man, and through their newfound powers of being able to access the metaverse, a realm consisting of palaces caused by the twisted cognition of individuals, the thieves use their newfound abilities to steal Kamoshida's heart, and while they initially consider killing him, they eventually decide to let him live to allow him to repent for his crimes. On the surface, it's a pretty straightforward story about abused children getting revenge for their abuse and learning to grow stronger as individuals for facing their demons. In the subtext, however, is a lot of worms that I honestly don't want to get into, but for the purposes of examining this game on a deeper level, I kinda have to. And to do that, we need to take a detour to talk about Kawakami, Joker's homeroom teacher and holder of the Temperance Confidant. Most, if not all, confidants in Persona are individuals on the outskirts of society for any given reason, and her overarching story is rather typical compared to other confidants. She's been financially forced into prostitution due to being blackmailed, and Joker finds out. He decides to keep her confidence in exchange for helping slack off to do Phantom Thief work during class hours. Some of the lines are a bit uncomfortable, but all in all, it's pretty typical fare. Until you hit her rank 9 confidant, and well, I think the game thinks it's fine because she's apprehensive about it, and Joker is clearly the one initiating things, but it doesn't make it any better. She's still his teacher and an adult in a position of power over him. Dubious legality aside, the game is just not willing to engage with the fact that it might be wrong for a student and a teacher to have a relationship, despite the very obvious power imbalance there, and the entire first arc of the game being centered around the same exact topic. Kamoshida's wrongdoing, according to the game, isn't that he's a pedophile. It's that he refuses to get consent, while the good teacher in Kawakami is fine because she does get consent and the student quote-unquote wants it, which is just not how statutory rape works. There's also something to be said in that Kawakami is female and Kamoshida is male, and that these sorts of relationships are viewed societally in a very different light. But the game has absolutely no interest in touching this. It's content labeling Kamoshida an abuser while Kawakami is labeled a romanceable confidant, the same as any of the appropriately aged girls. Again, this has been hashed to death before, but keep that unwillingness to engage with its own narrative in mind as we continue moving forward. Next, we have the Museum of Vanity arc, the second arc of the game and the introduction to our newest party member, the artist Yusuke. He also finds himself victimized by societal power structures due to the fact that the man who should be helping protect him and encouraging his talent for art, Madarame, is in fact stealing his work and taking credit for it. Throughout the arc, we learn that Madarame's seminal work was stolen from Yusuke's mother, the Phantom Thieves steal his heart, and he eventually confesses his crimes. I don't have as much to say about this arc as I did Kamoshida's. In the end, it's more of the same fare of an individual abuser being brought to justice. There's not much that's professed here other than the fact that stealing work is bad and abuse is wrong. The systems that put him into place, that encouraged him to steal art rather than creating it himself, and that allowed his students to be taken advantage of are never examined, and never really mentioned again as far as I've been able to tell. Then we have the Bank of Gluttony arc. We're introduced to our next party member in Makoto. She's less of an outcast compared to the rest of the party, as she's an exemplary student and student council president, doing seemingly everything she should in order to succeed, but still finds herself victim to societal power structures due to the fact that her more deferential nature leads others to not taking her seriously, stringing her along with promises of a university recommendation for their own benefit without any real intent of following through. Then we have the major antagonist of the arc, Junya Kaneshiro. He's a mafia boss who preys on students, blackmailing them into extortion in order to grow more and more wealthy. As the story develops, eventually his heart is changed and he confesses his crime, same as the rest, and we learn that there's a mysterious figure that's been causing the mental shutdowns plaguing Japan's citizens. Analyzing this arc, the game is willing to address that organized crime is bad and ultimately just preys on the vulnerable and weak in society, but the onus of change is put on individuals rather than the systems that enable those individuals to rise to power in the first place. Kaneshiro is a bad man, and once his heart is changed, then that's it. Everything is solved and the status quo is restored. Except that's just not how organized crime works. Not at all. Am I expecting too much narratively out of Persona 5? I don't think so. I think the writers are clearly exceedingly talented, and all it would take is a small shift in direction for the story to address societal ills far more holistically. After all, it doesn't need to be a solution shackled by reality where there's very little that can be done about crime without huge systematic changes. Shin Megami Tensei as a series is no stranger to drastic societal changes which alter the very way the fabric of reality functions. While Persona as a series tends to be a bit more grounded in the everyday life of specific individuals, it doesn't necessarily have to be wholly realistic. We're already suspending our disbelief to believe that a talking cat is friends with a teenager who can wield the desires within people's hearts in order to fight crime. Why not suspend it ever so slightly further to believe that he might be able to use those powers in order to make real systematic changes within society, rather than making minuscule changes within single individuals? Maybe we'll get to that later, but for now... Next up is the Pyramid of Wrath arc, which is definitely my favorite, as it's pretty self-enclosed and makes for a snappy character introduction for our new party member, Futaba. It's ultimately about manipulation in a vulnerable child, and that child coming to terms with the trauma she's been through in order to come through stronger for it. There's not much to be said about society as a whole in this arc, other than finding out that Futaba's mother was murdered because of the research she was engaged in, and the adults involved were the ones responsible for manipulating Futaba into believing her mother's death was her fault. There's still the idea that specific bad apples are responsible for the wrongdoing in this case, but the extent of the story is scaled inward to be far more personal and more about combating the trauma experienced by a single girl rather than being a story about engaging directly with an antagonist who represents societal ills. All in all, a very concise and solid arc. Following that, we have the Spaceship of Greed arc. We're simultaneously introduced to our semi-final party member Haru and her father Kunikazu Okumura. He's a man who's ostensibly involved in the mental shutdowns, and who is only interested in furthering his empire, using anything available to him in order to further his own ambitions. He's attempting to sell Haru in a marriage she doesn't want, making her yet another victim of those who are supposed to protect her. After the events of the dungeon, the Phantom Thieves manage to change Okumura's heart, only for him to be assassinated afterwards by a mysterious Persona user. This causes an uproar with the Phantom Thieves fans, causing a sharp decline in their popular standing. This follows the theme of power corrupting, as when the Phantom Thieves grow too socially powerful, their hubris undoes them with his death, which, due to their using fame as a lever for power, causes their social downfall and eventual relative ostracization. Even if it was technically a setup and wasn't directly their fault, it's an interesting idea, as it's one of the few times the actions of the Phantom Thieves are examined in a critical light. I would have loved more of this, but unfortunately, those moments are few and far between. Then, in the Casino of Envy arc, we get our final party member, Akechi. He's a star detective who's been trying to catch the Phantom Thieves for the entirety of the game, but who's suddenly decided to join them. Not suspicious at all. This arc surrounds the palace of Sei Nijima, Makoto's elder sister. This is a character who's been in quite a few scenes already, but who I've refrained from talking about so far. Like Futaba, she's unique in that she is not outwardly evil like the rest of the palace holders, and is also somewhat a victim of societal expectations, as she's been forced to take over the household following her and Makoto's father's death, having to take more and more cases and being more and more aggressive about pursuing justice regardless of the legality of the methods used due to the expectations weighed on her. One of the largest flaws, according to the game, is her hypocrisy, as she's basically willing to step outside the law to catch the Phantom Thieves, stooping down to their level, so to speak, by using extra-legal means in order to catch them. This is super interesting, and I would have loved for the game to explore this more thoroughly, both from Sei's perspective as a representation of a problem cop who's willing to do whatever it takes to stop crime, and from the perspective of the Phantom Thieves as a representation of those forced to commit crime by being pushed out of the protection of the legal system, as I think there's a lot to say about cops who are willing to go outside of the law to find their own justice, and whether or not their position makes them any more just than those who are forced into breaking the law due to circumstance in the first place. I don't know. It feels like there might be something there. Suffice it to say, though, that I think this arc, though interesting in its own right, could have been further explored more deeply. While Sei does eventually come to see the light and understand that what she's doing was wrong, I feel like there could have been more to explore. Regardless, following this, we're treated to a scene of Joker being abused by the police, where he refuses to give up his accomplices, despite being warned that he'll likely lose his life if it goes to court without deal. Akechi is revealed as a traitor who sold out the group. Big shock. Joker fakes his death through some pancake-related shenanigans, and Sei is convinced to help Joker escape custody, and the gang reunites at his house. Then we have the Cruiser of Pride arc, in which it's revealed that Masayoshi Shido, a prominent politician, was the one handling Akechi, and also the one responsible for Futaba's mother's death. He's been using his knowledge of the cognitive realm to cause mental shutdowns in political opponents in order to further his political goals. As a politician, he uses the media to feed society's base urges, and benefits off the systemic othering of those he views as beneath him, while espousing ideas of national strength and protecting future generations. Throughout the arc, Akechi gets dealt with and has his redemption, and we learn more about the crimes Shido committed. He is eventually defeated, and his heart is changed. However, his former associate continued to scheme, deciding to advance his plans without him. And honestly, I think that's great. It solves the issues I had with how shallow the conclusion in the Bank of Gluttony arc was. Just because one wrongdoer is dealt with doesn't mean that anything within the system has changed, and ultimately, as long as those who seek power are unduly rewarded for it, there are going to be those who use that power for their own gain, rather than helping others. The Phantom Thieves realize this and decide to begin working to change the national perception of events surrounding Shido in order to bring the whole conspiracy to light. This leads into the Mementos arc, in which the protagonists delve into the cognition of society as a whole. Within, they find a prison where those viewed favorably by society are kept prisoner. Despite their status, these prisoners view it best to stay within the structure of this prison, hostile to anyone who might threaten to release them. Being in the system is safest. Being in the system is for the best, even if it means being slave to the system itself. Even those who benefited most from the power imbalances inherent within society, the previous palace holders, are ultimately shackled by it as well. While systemic othering benefits some more than others, in the end it's bad for everyone. Society has a vested interest in othering those who are undesirable for whatever reason, shackling those who do fall in line while ostracizing the rest. We are then introduced to the concept of the Holy Grail, an ideological being which represents the collective will of humanity. After failing to defeat the Grail, reality and the cognitive world begin combining with only our confidants aware of it, and the rest of humanity going about their day as normal. The Phantom Thieves decide to fight back against insurmountable odds and eventually kill God with the power of friendship, as is tradition. Those involved with the mental shutdowns are brought to justice, and the credits roll on what would be the end of the story in the base game. In conclusion, I think this arc is great. It solves so many of the issues I had with the rest of the story's tendency towards putting blame on single individuals, as well as being an interesting narrative on society's tendency to conformity and indecision. If I had to nitpick, I think that they might have overdone the abstractness a bit too much. While I adore the idea that it takes collective work and a general banding together of ostracized groups in order to enact real societal change, and that only by working together can we fight the general apathy and stagnation of society, I think that the game overshoots how abstract and fictional the solution is. So while I think that the general conclusion is great, it just takes some digging through the fiction in order to actually reach the message within, which could potentially be overlooked for the more shallow and obvious story of defeating God with the power of friendship. But we have one last arc to discuss as part of the royal version of the game, the Maruki arc. This one might take a bit of explaining. Basically, the school counselor at Joker's school, Takuto Maruki, has gained the ability to merge the cognition of someone's wishes with reality, in an attempt to create a world without suffering where anyone can achieve their dreams. Haru's father is still alive, as is Futaba's mother. Morgana the cat has become human, and Yusuke's mother has finally gotten credit for the work Madarame stole. We eventually get our last party member, learn about Maruki's backstory, and eventually defeat him, changing his heart by convincing him that in the end, people would rather live in reality than in a perfect world. Everyone escapes except Joker, who ends up going to jail in order to testify against Shido. The Phantom Thieves and all the confidants come together to get him acquitted, and he eventually rides off into the sunset. And honestly, all of this is really, really interesting. It essentially pits the ideas of escapism and reality against each other, exploring the fact that for some, reality can be too painful to bear, while acknowledging that in the end, some realism is necessary despite the pain that might accompany the reality of our everyday lives. It's really fascinating, and while I wish the game would delve into both beliefs more deeply, I think that it makes for a really snappy and succinct way of exploring those ideals. Again, if I had to nitpick, I wish the game would have explored the dichotomy between the actions taken by Maruki and the Phantom Thieves more deeply. Namely, the Phantom Thieves this entire game have been enacting their own sense of justice by forcibly changing the hearts of twisted individuals. While their actions might be correct, it doesn't necessarily make them right. And despite it all, the group is still enacting vigilante justice against those they deem incorrect. But this is basically the same as what Maruki is doing, except he's changing the lives of good individuals to be happy and pain-free, without their consent. Going back to the Bank of Gluttony arc and my issues with how Kaneshiro was handled, Maruki is doing exactly what I thought it would have been interesting to have happened. His goals are ultimately misguided, and he has an exceedingly poor understanding of the real societal factors behind crime, but he's using his power to enact social change at a level which is only possible because of his powers of actualization. He recognizes that there are real social issues facing society that can't be solved by stopping single criminals or changing individuals' hearts, and that the only way to enact real social change is for a large group of people to have their perceptions changed. He sees the problem, and he's trying to fix it. Now, do I think the way, in real life, to do this is by brainwashing people? Absolutely not. And just like is shown in the game, I think that in the long term, his plan had real issues, as eventually people would have realized the changes that he'd enacted, always living with a sense of malaise about their perfect existence. And isn't that just fascinating to consider? But once again, the game isn't really interested in delving into why Maruki is wrong, other than the fact that he's brainwashing people, and that isn't moral, so it must be stopped. There's also the messy issue of the fact that he, when bringing individuals back to life with actualization, is bringing back fully realized living beings. When they're brought back, they are confirmed to be fully alive in that reality. Maruki has essentially solved the concept of death. And while some who were brought back in this way might consent to being sent back to death, I fully doubt that everyone would. It's just messy all around, and I don't have a solid conclusion on the morality of forcibly bringing the dead back to life without their consent, but I felt like it needed to be mentioned as it's a further way in which the game gets a bit messy in this arc without really engaging in its own subtext. We never ask Futaba's mother if she wants to be alive, nor do we ask Okumura if he would rather be dead than spend time with his daughter. Despite this, in order to get the good ending, the Phantom Thieves end Maruki's reality and convince him he was wrong. The game is more interested in maintaining the status quo than exploring if maybe, just maybe, Maruki is kinda right. His methods are wrong, but he's not malicious, and ultimately he's just another soul who was hurt by a system that runs on hurting the downtrodden, doing what he can to enact change in the way he's best able. It would have been fascinating to see the game explore this a bit deeper, and I was a bit disappointed that it never came up. Despite that, this arc is a fantastic addendum to the game, even if the themes explored within are wholly separate from the major themes of the rest of the game. So now we reach the question, what does Persona believe in? And what issues do I find with the narrative as a whole? There are obvious themes between arcs. Power corrupts and is only really self-serving. Freedom is integral to a healthy existence, and those who limit it are ultimately wrong. Anyone can rise above their situation to become better and stronger for it, as well as the repeated idea that societal power structures exclude any who don't fall in line, and inherently do not function without othering those who fall to the wayside in society. Even the arcs that I don't like as much, such as Madarame and Kanashiro's, serve to further prove that point. And the Mementos arc hammers home that ultimately societal othering only serves to imprison those who do fall in line and exist according to society's ideas of what is right. All really good beliefs to espouse that I can absolutely agree with. But I sadly feel like there is some missed potential. I would have loved it had the game been willing to engage more deeply with its own themes and explore them less cursorily. Even with the conclusions reached in the Mementos arc, I feel like the game is limited somewhat by putting the burden of change on individuals rather than the systems which allow and even encourage those individuals to rise to power in the first place. In the end, despite its grandiosity and statements to the contrary, I just feel that Persona 5 doesn't have any interest in challenging the status quo. At the end of the game, Joker rides off into the sunset and very little is changed about the world as a whole. While he's made changes on a small scale with the Palace Wielders and prevented the national disaster that would have been Shido, people are still committing crimes, living in poverty, being othered, and there's just nothing to be done. While it may be willing to admit narratively that there are issues our society faces, it seems apathetic in actually addressing those issues outside of the idea that society as a whole has some bad apples, and if those individuals were removed from power, things would be much better. But ultimately, while I feel the narrative is limited somewhat by a rather safe and lukewarm take, all in all, I think Persona believes in quite a lot. Obviously, the story resonated with a lot of people, including me, so ultimately, what does it matter, right? Would I prefer it if Joker helped the poor and was a modern-day Robin Hood who addressed systemic corruption? Maybe, but probably not. I enjoyed the hell out of Persona 5 despite everything, and don't expect much different out of Atlus considering their track record with not rocking the boat when it comes to societal change. But it chalks up to being the most slightly bit disappointing for me. Anime and JRPGs have always been the realm of idealism, with characters that are larger than life and better than human, so why settle for putting the blame on sick individuals and the symptoms of an ill society rather than addressing the issues at their core? After all, victory against a single criminal is meaningless. The true enemy is society itself. Thank you for watching.